Some fighters chase belts. George Chuvalo chased something deeper: respect, pride, and the will to never quit. Born on September 12, 1937, in Toronto to Croat parents who had left behind the hills of Ljubuski for a better life in Canada, George wasn't handed anything. He built his path with bare fists and pure heart. By 17, he wasn't just fighting, he was crushing. In May 1955, he knocked out Peter Piper in the first round to become Canada's amateur heavyweight champion. He walked away from the amateur ring with a perfect record: 16 wins, all knockouts, none past the fourth round. They called him Boom Boom, not just for the sound of his punches, but for the shock he brought every time he stepped into the ring. In 1956, Chuvalo turned pro in a way few ever have, by knocking out 4 fighters in one night. The crowd at Maple Leaf Gardens couldn't believe it, and neither could Jack Dempsey, who had hosted the tournament. From there, Chuvalo rose. He wasn't always at the top, but he was always close, ranked among the world's best heavyweights across the 1960s and early 70s. Number 9 in 1963. Number 5 in 1964. He climbed to number 3 in 1965. He stayed in the mix, even in 1970, ranked 7th, still feared, still fighting. George Chuvalo didn't just stand toe-to-toe with legends. He survived them all. And most incredibly, in 93 pro fights, he was never knocked down. Not once. Some fights aren't about winning. They're about standing tall when no one expects you to. For George Chuvalo, that moment came on March 29, 1966, under the lights of Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. Across the ring stood Muhammad Ali, the world champion, the fastest, the slickest, the man nobody could touch. But Chuvalo didn't blink. That night, George wasn't just fighting for a title. He was fighting to prove that toughness doesn't talk. It shows up, takes every punch, and stays on its feet. For 15 rounds, Chuvalo marched forward, hit with jabs, uppercuts, combinations that had dropped others. But George kept coming. He didn't fall. He didn't fold. And when it was all over, he didn't complain about the loss. Ali won the decision. But even he had to admit what just happened. "He's the toughest guy I ever fought," Ali said, words that would follow Chuvalo forever. They met again later, and again George won the distance. No one remembers the scorecards. What they remember is that Ali, at his peak, hit Chuvalo with everything, and Chuvalo never went down. Because that's who George was. A man who didn't need a belt to be a legend. George Chuvalo didn't pick easy fights. He chased the ones that most ran from, and he beat many of them. Through the years, he faced and defeated some of the best heavyweights in the world. Names like Johnny Arthur, Julio Medeiros, Howard King, Alex Mitev, and James J. Parker all fell before him. He stopped Ivan Durrell, outslugged Bob Claroux, and wore down warriors like Willie Besmanoff and Mike DeJohn. He even handed defeats to Jerry Quarry and Cleveland Williams, fighters feared in any era. But it wasn't just about the wins. Even in his losses, Chuvalo gave the crowd something to remember. He lost decisions to Floyd Patterson, Ernie Terrell, Bob Claroux, and Oscar Bonavena. But many believe those scorecards told the wrong story. The same went for the 2 draws he had with Alex Mitev and Tony Alongi, fights that could have gone his way. And when he did lose clean, he still stood tall. In 1967, Joe Frazier was tearing through the division. In 1970, George Foreman was a rising storm. Both times, Chuvalo took their best shots until the referee stepped in. He was still standing, still trying. The only time he left a fight early was in 1961, disqualified against Joe Erskine after repeated fouls and a heated exchange. But even then, he didn't fall. That's the story of George Chuvalo. 93 professional fights, never knocked down, not once. Because to him, staying on your feet wasn't just part of boxing. It was who he was. In the ring, George Chuvalo stood unshaken. But life outside the ropes had a way of punching harder. He was just 21 when he married Lynn, a girl of 15. Together, they had 5 children and tried to build a life away from the noise of the boxing world. But pain has a way of finding its way in. It started with Jesse, his oldest son. After a brutal motorbike crash in 1984, Jesse was prescribed painkillers. The relief turned into dependence, and then into something darker. Heroin came into the house, and it stayed. Jesse, Stephen, and George Lee, three of Chuvalo's sons, fell into addiction. They were in and out of jail, robbing pharmacies just to get by. In February 1985, Jesse took his own life. Only weeks later, Stephen overdosed again and again, 15 times in 2 months. Then came George Lee. He just gotten out of prison in 1993, but he was haunted. He tried to take his life before and had told people he wanted to die to be with Jesse. Days later, he overdosed and passed away. For days after that, Chuvalo's wife Lynn, broken, hollowed by grief, took her own life too. It didn't end there. In 1996, Stephen, who had been trying to turn his life around, nearing a degree in Russian literature, even was found dead from another overdose. George was shattered. He fell into a deep depression. His home was foreclosed. Creditors came for everything inside. The heavyweight who never once hit the canvas in the ring was now facing blows no training could prepare him for. But he didn't disappear. He began speaking. He talked to schools, to parents, to anyone who would listen about addiction, grief, and the pain that silence can cause. Slowly, he found healing in helping others. His son Mitchell became a high school teacher. His daughter Vanessa runs a food market. And George, somehow, stood back up. Not because he had to, but because that's who he's always been. 3 months after losing Lynn, the woman who had stood beside him through the rise and fall of their family, George Chuvalo tried to begin again. In January 1994, he married Joan O'Hara, 20 years younger, with 2 children of her own. It was a new chapter, but life doesn't always follow clean lines. The years, the fights, the grief, they all took their toll. The same head that had absorbed the punches of Foreman, Frazier, and Ollie began to show signs of wear. Slowly, George started to slip. His memory faded, his thinking clouded. By 2018, a court ruled he could no longer make decisions on his own, even about whether to reunite with Joanne after living apart for years. And by 2022, the strong man who had stood through every storm was living with advanced dementia. But the country never forgot him. In 1998, Canada named him to the Order of Canada, one of its highest honors. In 2005, his name was etched into Canada's Walk of Fame. And on March 26, 2013, the city he fought for, Toronto, handed him the key to the city. Not just for the punches he threw, but for the voices he reached in his fight against drugs and loss. But maybe that's the point. He fought, every round, every day, and that's what made him unforgettable.